We've all heard the saying, happy wife, happy life. But what does it really mean? Does it mean that in a heterosexual marriage, the husband is solely responsible for the success of the relationship? Does it mean that the wife is the only barometer of the relationship status that matters? Well, it turns out the answer is kind of neither. And maybe the phrase has no real meaning in real life. My name is Eric Bowman. I'm the communications person for the Canadian Psychological Association, and this is Mindful. A major international study dealing with relationship satisfaction is just wrapped up, looking at which members of heterosexual relationships are the best judges of where that relationship is headed. And it turns out that neither women nor men can predict the future success of their relationships any better than the other. Joining me once again for this episode today is the CPA's Membership and Association Development Lead, Catherine McLaren, as a co-host, and of course, one of the researchers responsible for this recent study. Let's meet Dr. Harasymchuk.
My name is Dr. Cheryl Harasymchuk. I'm a professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, in the Department of Psychology. Yeah, and I study how people maintain happiness in their long-term relationships.
Yes, and that's what we want to talk about today. You've written an interesting article in The Conversation about the notion of happy wife, happy life. And I don't know if you would go so far as to call that a myth or sort of a trope that we go by in our daily lives, but you hear it all the time. There's a guy in my fantasy football league who's named his team Happy Wife, Happy Life because I guess he really wants to hammer home the message. But is it a myth? Is it a trope? What is it exactly?
Well, it's definitely a long-held saying, not just held by lay people, but also relationship researchers as well. It's interesting to see that that particular phrase is not used in research articles. The idea that women somehow have this special ability to detect when things are going well or not going well in the relationship. This is something that has been long held by academics as well. And so it's a common saying. And we found some evidence to suggest that perhaps there's a better one that we could be using.
And the better one that you suggested is happy spouse, happy house, which is more inclusive. Is that because there's nothing that rhymes with husband?
Yeah, that's why. But also, it's a little bit of both, just like you mentioned. It's a bit more inclusive. Right. It reflects just this idea of partners in relationship and addresses the idea that, even though it's fun to talk about gender differences in relationship, a lot of what we find in our area is that the differences aren't as large as people think, or if they are, or they're not there at all.
Right. Now, in your study, you say you surveyed thousands of mixed gender couples. Is that only male and female couples or people identifying as male and female in those couples?
Yeah, exactly. So this mixed gender, we recruited, I was part of an international team led by Dr. Matthew Johnson, who's a professor of family science at the University of Alberta. And we recruited over 50,000 relationship satisfaction reports from what we call mixed gender couples. What that means is that within each couple, there was someone that identified as a woman and someone that identified as a man.
And you found that the predictor of later relationship satisfaction was not solely the, opinion of the woman that made the difference, right? That the opinion of the man in the couple made the difference just as much over the long term. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that? What was the method you used and how did you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, so I was part of a team that recruited over 900 mixed gender couples from the community. And what we did is we tracked them every day for 21 days. And we did this online. And each member of the couple completed a little short survey. And then another group of researchers had over 3,000 mixed gender couples, and these couples were assessed annually over 5 years. So what we do is we get people from the community and we have them fill out these short online questionnaires. And so, yes, like you mentioned, we didn't find these gender differences that the common saying would suggest, happy wife, happy life. A more scientific way of describing it would be the barometer hypothesis, that idea that the women serve as the as the barometers, and they're better able to judge the satisfaction levels. So yeah, we didn't find these gender differences. And then just stepping back, the bigger picture is that relationship satisfaction, it goes up and down each day. And if things are going well one day, it's likely that it's going to be going well the next day and perhaps down the road. Alternatively, if things are not going well in the relationship one day, it's likely to have some sort of carryover effects to the next day and further into the future. And we didn't find, contrary to the women as barometers of relationship satisfaction hypothesis, we didn't find that women were better predictors of relationship satisfaction. It was the case that both men and women had equal predictive power of what was going to happen in the future in terms of how the relationship is going.
Did you find that you were finding similar responses regardless of the age of participants? There's a lot of conversation about how the younger generations are much less likely to be defined by gender norms, things like emotion and emotional intelligence.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it makes a lot of sense. This wasn't a main part of the paper, and if it was done, it might have been one of the other team members who looked into it. I wouldn't. It's common for us to look in our research at age, relationship length, and gender. It just happened to be that gender was the focus of this one. So I don't have an answer for you, but what you propose there makes a lot of sense.
Now, I assume that when you send these questionnaires out, the participants are answering them separately in a blind way, right? Because I feel like if I were sitting next to my wife and she said, things are really not going very well, that I would have some pause and say to myself, wait, maybe they're not. And then I might answer in a more negative way than I had anticipated answering prior to receiving the question. Right?
Oh, you are totally correct, Eric. The participants, so each couple member is sent a link to their own private email accounts, and they are asked to complete the little survey independently each day. Right. So they're not supposed to have their partner looking over them, because I agree with you. It will likely change the responses if they were A, filling it out together, or E, if they were in close proximity. No, they don't want a couple member doesn't want to get in trouble for putting down a negative rating for the day.
And it strikes me that the notion of women as barometers for the relationship comes from a different place in the science, right? You're talking about this notion in science over the years that women have a greater, emotional understanding of relationships and that sort of thing. Whereas in the culture in general, I think the phrase happy wife, happy life sort of believes that the women's perception of their relationships is more accurate than men, because men have a wider variety of outcomes that can lead to happiness. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense, right? The prevailing sentiment seems to be men need less to be happy. And I think a lot of that comes from sitcoms.
Yeah, the origins of these sayings, it's hard to pinpoint where, but we have a few different ideas. Like one could be related to a social psychological perspective related to gender roles. This idea that what we grow up with, what we grow up seeing, like you said in sitcoms, what we see with our family members, that how we observe others relating to each other, we sort of adopt this as a truth. Like, oh, must be the way things go. And so if we continually hear sayings like, happy wife, happy life. Or if we hear sayings like, I'm not sure if there's a saying with this, but just this idea that men need less to be happy in a relationship, then, you start to just take it as a truth. And what I love about my job is that we can take these common sayings and we can actually, test them and gather evidence to offer our opinion on the matter.
Right. Now, I'm picturing one day down the road, a sitcom being created based on this new understanding of relationships. This sort of upends the current sitcom dynamic, right? The current dynamic being that the wife in the couple is, ethereally beautiful and incredibly smart and has a handle on all of the emotional stability in the relationship. And the guy is some idiot doofus who's lucky to have her or probably doesn't deserve her. And the plot line is always that he's done something to screw up and has to make it up. And, she ends up being the decider of whether his effort to make it up is worthy of them continuing in a relationship. And that's like the constant, easy, script that you can write for sitcoms. Do you think that actually does damage to our perceptions of relationships? There's a lot of studies about watching porn does damage to your perception of sexuality. right? Does watching a sitcom change the way that you might approach your own relationship?
Yeah, so I won't talk about it from the way of, does it cause damage? But I'd rather frame it in terms of like the good that can come from showing varied perspectives and showing, like, having a sitcom where it was emphasis on more on the shared responsibility and having all these different, like, a variety of views of how relationships go. Because I don't want to take away from the fact that there are some relationships where it is the case where the woman in the relationship might be better at figuring out what things are going on. But I also believe that there are other relationships where the man might be better at it. Or, it might be most of the case, it might be that they're both kind of good at it, at figuring out what's going on. So this is why I get excited when there are, movies and TV shows or books or different perspectives that just give a broader idea and not just giving us the same old, which can be kind of comforting, right? You can kind of like, oh, this is how life is supposed to be. Just kind of follow this along. But, a lot of people want to make some change. And as an example, if the happy wife, happy life saying, it sounds good on the surface of it, right? This is supposed to be quick advice. You're making your one of your partner very happy. But then there are some dark sides of this. One of the dark sides is that it seems like it's the woman's responsibility to notice when something is going wrong and to fix it. Or if the relationship isn't going well, that it doesn't really have anything to do with the man in the relationship. And as you mentioned before, it might be the case like, well, man doesn't need as much. And I haven't encountered any evidence to suggest that. I have in the literature, it seems like there's interdependence. Both partners matter. But the conversation of like gender roles and everything is beyond my scope. And there's people that really make that their expertise, but I just know a little bit of it, how it applies in relationships.
It feels like the saying really upholds this belief that men and people who identify as male are passive players in romantic relationships and household relationships. Their opinions, feelings, and actions don't serve in the same way that those of the person who identifies as female.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. So yeah, that's one of the dark sides of, if there is an existing belief that men in these mixed gendered relationships, that their opinion doesn't count, essentially, because it's all driven by the women in the relationship, then they might just, rest and wait for things to happen. When meanwhile, a relationship is a two-way street, and it could go so much smoother if both people sort of stepped up and contributed. But again, I guess I want to be careful. I'm really not in the business of should. I'm in the business of describing what we see in our samples. So it's really up to other people to really make those comments. It's just inevitably when doing research, especially one like this, right, that really hits home for a lot of people, inevitably people ask about, what does this mean? What can we do? And I'd like to talk about the implications. I like to, dream big and think about what that could be. But ultimately, it's up to somebody else to work out these other details about what we should be doing and how specifically to apply these things.
So what is the big dream then? What's the biggest thing that you think can come out of this?
The biggest thing that I took away from this is that it's a shared responsibility to mind the relationship. In this particular study, like I said before, relationship satisfaction goes up and down on a daily basis. It changes. And it's not just up to one member to notice that. It's the case that, at least in mixed gender relationships, both people are their assessment of the relationship is equally predictive of what's going to happen down the road. And so shared responsibility and also underscores the importance of interdependence, this two-way street idea. That is, I influence my partner and my partner influences me.
Right. And you mentioned that, it fluctuates, right? Relationship satisfaction goes up and down on a daily basis, all the time, right? And the way that you're presenting this is that if a person feels higher than usual relationship satisfaction on one particular day, then that feeling seems to carry over into the next day and then even the next year and the next 5 years, which indicates some kind of momentum, right? Like if the satisfaction is higher than usual, then there's a better chance of that sparking some momentum for it to be a better relationship. That seems to be more likely than what I might describe as regression to the mean. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what this suggests in terms of like day-to-day terms is that when things are going well in your relationship, or like you said, better than their usual, right? Everyone has their own bar, what they set for what makes for a good relationship. And if it's above their usual, then it's not time to take a rest. Like if you just had a really great date night, it's not time to take a little break and say, oh, things are good, I'm just going to put on myself on cruise mode. It's time to double down and maybe make plans for your next fun and exciting activity to do together. On the other hand, if things aren't going well, it's time to act now, because it could, any little changes you make in terms of, maybe working on how you handle conflict, trying to find ways to de-escalate it, or thinking of ways to express more gratitude, or doing more fun and exciting things with your partner. Like that you can turn it around. That's the hopeful message, that because it goes up and down, there are certain things that you can do to maintain your relationship in a healthier and happier way.
Now, does the actual action of taking this survey, of evaluating your happiness in the relationship, does that have an effect on the way that you approach the relationship? I mean, I don't imagine you studied that specifically, but I can't imagine that it wouldn't.
Yeah, I'd love to study that. I think it's really interesting. As an example, in the part of this project that I was involved in, where we recruited mixed gender couples from the community, we tracked them every day for 21 days. So each day for those 21 days, they had like, how was your relationship going? Did you express gratitude? There was extra questions besides what was presented in the study, right? These are big ones. So I feel like the daily self-reflection on how your relationship is going, I mean, it makes sense that you might want to try out some new good things that you've read about in the survey, right? So that's an empirical question about whether actually participating in the studies and thinking about your relationship, whether that could lead to increased relationship quality. I think that'd be a really neat study to do. And in fact, I've had some, in terms of anecdotal evidence, where some of the participants were mentioning that at the end of the study, they mentioned that participating in it together gave them new ideas. It helped them to be more aware of some of the things that they could be thinking about in their relationship. And in some ways, it was a way to grow together, like rather than just going on an exciting date night. Here was some way where that over the 3-week period, they could go through a similar experience. And maybe they talked about it at dinner. Maybe they talked about it at the end, even though all their responses were private as they were doing it. I think that reflecting on your relationship and getting some good tips can potentially be good. Although need to sort that out, like do a study.
It does sound kind of lovely, and as though it would be a positive influence, just even that daily or occasional trigger of like, oh, am I practicing gratitude in my relationship? I can imagine how that would help and would really create space for some of that beauty.
Yeah, because one of the takeaways is that it's important to take stock of your relationship, given that the relationship satisfaction levels go up and down, and given the importance of being aware of how things are going, and that you could change the relationship path. Yeah, I think it could potentially have some good, and I'm happy about that, because I like to discover what's going on in the community, but I wouldn't want to be doing it in a way that made things worse. So the idea that this could have some benefits. All of this being said, is that if people have life stressors going on, it's one thing to know about and reflect on it. But when you're in the moment, you're hungry, you're stressed, you're tired, it might be harder to implement some of these good things. But I think overall, people might come out ahead.
Eric and I did a podcast interview the other day about mindfulness in sexual health and happiness. And we were talking about a workbook that accompanied the research. And it feels like this is another opportunity where a workbook would be so fantastic, just to kind of sit down and for people who, journal, have those questions to guide you through just the thought exercise and how that could just improve the thought exercise, how it could improve your relationship.
I think it would be good, especially for people that are like, average level of satisfaction or above, because if things aren't going well, you might not want to be journaling. Actually, there probably could be good things from journaling. I'm not a clinical psychologist. I don't do that. Maybe there is some good, but just maybe the daily reminder of if you had to think about what is your partner doing well today or not so well, and you had the constant reminders. But again, maybe there's something I don't understand because I'm not in the specifically the helping people business.
I wonder, is there a difference when you're doing this study between people who are, Catherine asked about ages, right? Older people versus younger people and that sort of thing. Is there a difference that you found, or did you look at this, between people who are married, people who are living common law, people who are not living together?
I don't know off the top of my head. It seems like if we were, I'm not sure if we specified that or we looked into whether it mattered whether they were married or not. But again, that could be another one of those things when you do a big team project and the focus is on gender. Might not, I don't know the answer off my top of the head to whether that made a difference. So it wasn't a central part. I imagine if there was some great differences, maybe we would want to make a little comment about that, but that didn't show up. And at least in my work that I do, not necessarily related to this project, I don't always get enough people in each of the categories to do a good enough assessment. But even taking that into consideration, I haven't noticed large differences, at least in what I study. It's important to remember that when we are doing these studies, we're recruiting people that are volunteering to be in these studies, right? So there might be some certain characteristics of the people that volunteer that might, go over and above any differences that might have in terms of their relationship status, whether they're married or common law. But again, it's an empirical question that might be good to look at. Yeah.
You mentioned stressors, right? External stressors that are going to impact a relationship. COVID obviously is a huge one. It changed the dynamics of many, many relationships. Something else too, like maybe financial security, right? If you're broke, you're both going to be equally stressed about it at the same time, presumably. What happens when one partner takes on more of that stress than the other partner, right? Especially in terms of maybe something like financial security, where one partner is the person who makes more money and maybe she has more of that on her shoulders than the male partner does, right?
The takeaway that I had from the other project is that, the idea of it being a shared responsibility and there's interdependence and a two-way street. That doesn't mean that there aren't these differences that exist within a relationship separate from gender, right? So there could somebody that has more power, somebody that has more stress, somebody that has to, if something's not going well for a partner, let's say they're sick, let's say a close family member is ill, they need their partner to step up and help them out and maybe carry a little more weight around the house just to make it a little easier for them.
I'm wondering if this, being in this research position, doing the research that you do and dealing with the things that you deal with, how does that affect your day-to-day life? How do you approach your relationship in a different way? Or do you, would you participate in this study if somebody else were doing it?
Oh, these are great questions. So it's hard to tell whether, because I'm so immersed in this. Like I've been doing relationship science now. If I consider when I was a student for 20 years, it's hard to know what Cheryl would be like if I wasn't immersed in all this. But I guess if I had to really step back and get an outsider opinion, I don't see how it can't be influencing the way I think about my relationships. Like I might be more aware than some others about some of the little tricks you can do, the things that don't seem like much, like gratitude, trying something new with your partner, if they share good news with you, reciprocating the good energy, or being mindful of the ways that you can de-escalate conflict. Maybe I might be more likely to do them or have more tools in my tool belt. All of this being said is that I am human. And let's say if I'm tired or if I'm hangry, then my gut reaction might not always be the good thing, all the good things that I tell people that are helpful for their relationship. So I might have, what are some differences? I might have fancier names for some of the things that many of my other couples are doing. They're already doing these things. They just they're not calling it self-expansion as an example.
Right.
And,
is there a fancier name for hangry?
I think it's a perfect name. I just think it
really is. Like,
is
that is as descriptive as it gets. I love that.
It captures it very well.
Yeah. Oh, and in terms of doing the study, that's a good question. I think that would be great for my partner and I to participate in a study like this, to be a bit, to increase our awareness of maybe what's going well, what isn't going well or as well. And maybe it could be a conversation starter.
Right.
There's something a little comforting in the knowledge that even the people who are armed with the tools and the knowledge and the words still know they might not be perfect when they're hangry and tired.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, no, I am perfect. What am I talking about? Yes, of course. All this training has made me perfect. Just please. Yeah, I want my partner to know that too.
We will put it in the notes.
Okay.
Yes, that will go in the show notes. Cheryl is perfect. And no notes.
Yeah.
So where do you go from here? You've completed this study. You've determined that, no one partner in a relationship is a better predictor than the other, or can be expected to be a better predictor than the other. Although I'm wondering, before we get to what comes next, I am wondering if you found in doing this, if very often one partner was a better predictor of what came next, regardless of their gender. Right? If generally speaking, there is one of the two people in the relationship who is a better barometer than the other as to where it's going.
Oh, I think that's an excellent question. Yeah, because this picks up on what we were talking about before, how there are people play different roles within the relationship. And they play different roles, and they might take on different emotional responsibilities in the relationship at different times, right? There's so much, it's such a dynamic thing. What we do when we do a big study like this is we say ahead of time what we're going to test. And the focus here was to tackle the idea that the women as barometers. And so we focused all of our energy on that. And I don't believe that we for all of these different, with couples that we had, over 4,000 mixed gendered couples, I'm not sure whether we looked at, or whether the other team members looked at patterns of like, what percentage of these couples have a person that regularly is the one who is maybe the better person, right? Separate from gender. That's like this is what's so fun about what we do.
Yeah.
Is that, you think, okay, this is a big enough project just to focus on this. And you're like, and as you get into, you're like, oh, but that's another interesting question. So yeah, I didn't look at that, and I'm not aware of the other team members looking at that, but that might be something they're looking at.
Terrific. Okay. So what comes next? Do you build off this study and do something else, or are you going to start working on something completely new?
Great question. So I was fortunate to be a team member here. I was invited by Dr. Matthew Johnson to be a part of it. So this is his main area that he is focusing on for research. But the reason why I was invited to be a team member is because I study how people maintain happiness in their established relationships. And so what's next for me is to do more of a deep dive in terms of the good things people do in their established relationships to keep them going strong and for them to have a bit of spark. So as an example, one thing that I look at is how people maintain a sense of growth and passion and novelty and excitement in their relationship. And what I've done in the past was looked at things like date nights, like the exciting things they can do together to give them new perspectives of their relationship and, keep the spark alive. But the new direction I'm taking things is about what you do on your own time, with your work, your hobbies, your volunteering, and how that might shape the growth of the relationship. So for example, like over the course of the dinner table, if sometimes, you don't have a lot of interesting things to share. And then it might kind of makes it seem like, the relationship's kind of losing its spark. But you could imagine if you had just spent, a day working on a hobby. Let's say you'd gone kayaking for the day and you saw all sorts of interesting birds, and then you could bring those stories up at the dinner table. This might be another way to add some growth and novelty and excitement that doesn't necessarily involve the couple members coordinating the activity and finding something they both like, which can be challenging. This way, at times, it's another tool in their tool belt. You go off, you work on yourself, some personal growth, and then as long as you share it with your partner, it can help to create this sense that, our relationship is moving forward, and it's it's a happy place to be.
Catherine is getting married in like a year, right?
Yes.
Right. So I'm bringing her on here as some sort of, premarital advice, which is what you're giving now. You, I am in a long-term relationship where I also am perfect. And I have never done anything wrong.
I would like to state that just because I am not yet married, it doesn't mean I'm not yet perfect.
Okay, yeah.
That is true. Well, we're all perfect, but perhaps some advice for our spouses or spouses to be. Maybe we'll close with a few tips then from your long history of research, right? What does spice up a date night? What is something that you can do on a date night that you might not otherwise do that makes it more interesting for both people?
Yeah. So more broadly, I think, the people that are in counseling, they could provide, they are trained to take in the broader scope of things and provide good advice. But like you mentioned, just what are my 2 cents after being reading all these articles and doing this research? Well, I think it's important to be mindful of your expectations and communicate that with your partner. Like what do you expect in terms of, for recreation, for finances, where you want to live, like sort those things out. But I'll just speak specific to my research. The key thing here is that there isn't a set list of things that will make your relationship happy. It's what you think is, as an example, exciting or novel. And so what might have happened during the pandemic for many people is that they might have set the bar lower. They might have just gone into protection mode and say, well, maybe if we order out food from a different place or go for a walk around a different block, that this will meet the excitement quota. So in terms of that relates to my advice for what people can do in their relationship is that it's important that both members find something they like to do. And it's specific to that relationship. So some couples, they might like going skydiving. They might like going on adventures around the world. And other couples, they might like going on nature hike, or they might like going to a play. And as long as it meets their criteria for what is novel and exciting, that's really all that matters. And so I just think a nice discussion between both couple members of what they like to do is good. And then related to my other research is that it doesn't all have to be about what you do together. Sometimes it's about personal growth and then sharing it with your partner, maybe introducing them to little parts of your life outside of the confines of the dinner table.
That makes perfect sense. I like it. My wife recently discovered that one of her favorite things is watching The Bachelor in Paradise while I complain about it. Right? She finds my complaints about the show more entertaining, perhaps, than the show itself. And as such, that's become a thing that we do. And then I'll go off on my own and I'll watch some baseball. And then I'm going to tell her what Shohei Ohtani did today. And she's going to feign interest. And that's going to be a thing that we do. Yep.
Okay. Every relationship has their own dynamics, eh?
Yep.
I will say that Kyle and I do the same thing, but I'm not watching Bachelor in Paradise. I'm watching community productions of Phantom of the Opera. So, everybody's got their niche.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, one day we will all collaborate on a sitcom that takes into account all of the things that we've discussed here today. And it will be a smash hit in Canada. We'll hire actors from Schitt's Creek, and that will be our thing, I think. Right?
Yeah. Sounds good.
All right. Cheryl, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us about this today. It's been wonderful having you on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I've had a lot of fun talking about the research and then just about relationships in general. Thanks to Dr. Andrew Kim, chair of the addiction psychology section at the CPA, and to Dr. Nassim Tabri, research psychologist specializing in addiction at Carleton University. We had this conversation in preparation for Psychology Month back in February, and the profile I wrote on the addiction psychology section is available on the CPA website. The link is in the show notes to this podcast episode. Today's episode was written, hosted, and published by me, Eric Bowman. It was produced and edited by Jamie Montgomery, and our theme song is Avenues by David Taylor.